Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying this warm weather. James just reminded me it's not really spring yet because we have no greenery, but we'll take it. So we're in for a treat today, which is wonderful. Hope you all will enjoy it. Just a reminder to please ask questions. Type in under Q&A anytime from now until 3 o'clock, and James will try to answer your questions. So I'd now like to ask Beth Wood, our program chair, to please introduce James to us. Beth?
Thank you. Our speaker today is James Stewart, and James has given a number of truly fine presentations to us at Triple E over the years, and I'm really pleased that he's able to be back with us again today. James and I booked this lecture about 6 months ago on this topic, and neither he nor I could have predicted that, very sadly, Estonia would be so prominently in the news today. So sadly it is, and here we are. James earned his master's in music from the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. He earned his doctorate from the Hart School of Music at the University of Hartford. He has composed music for children's shows, rock bands, and symphony orchestras. You may have recognized James' voice and his presence from Vermont Public Radio, where he is a producer. He often reads the news, and he serves as the afternoon host on VPR Classical Station. It's a true pleasure to welcome back James Stewart.
Well, thank you so much. Just give me a second to share my screen and to make it so that everybody can see this presentation. Wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to come back and to talk with you and to be a part of EEE together. I want to invite you, if you haven't had a chance to check out Timeline. It's a podcast through VPR Classical that we've been doing, well, now 7 years. It's about as soon as I came onto VPR, we started doing this project, and it really came out of this idea, this desire to share education. When I was working as a teacher's assistant at the Hart School during my doctoral studies, I would have tutoring and teaching a lot of students in music history. And I used to make them take out a blank sheet of paper, and I would have them draw a line across it. And I said, this is now your timeline. And I want you to put on there all the dates you know, all the time periods, all the composers you can think of, all the important events of history. I want you to put it on this timeline. So the podcast itself started from there. The first 100 episodes really are walk through a chronological timeline. But since then, we've talked about a lot of different things, and you can find Timeline. There's over 200 episodes for you, talking about, like I said, many, many different topics. And it's all available at vpr.org/timeline or wherever you get podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. Just search for Timeline from VPR Classical, and you'll find us there. Now, over the years on Timeline, we've talked about a lot of different subjects and explored the development of music throughout history. We've had deep discussions about where music comes from and what music is. We looked at the ways that music touches our lives and influences our health and behavior. We've explored the ancient past and modern practices. It can all be very esoteric, and it can maybe sometimes leave you asking the question, so what? Like, what does it all mean? What's it for? Yeah, that's the question, right? A better question. For what? What is this exploration for? I stumbled across a forum online just a couple of years ago. It was a simple thread asking this simple question: when has music ever changed the world? And intrigued, I started reading this forum, and I have to tell you that my heart sank. There was response after response of individuals saying that music hasn't changed the world. Now, some said that music has influenced them personally, but they still thought the music itself hasn't brought about real societal change. Now, in contrast, if you Google that question, you'll find numerous other articles describing the top 10 songs that changed the world, or the 30 most influential artists of all time. But reading these articles, you would think that music sprang up in the 20th century, or that the world is limited to American or European popular music and the modern recording industry. So there's millennia of musical practice from every culture that feels ignored or unseen. And if you can't tell, I take issue with this because music has changed the world over and over again. And that is to say that the expression of music itself has affected society for good and for evil in every time period and in every culture. So I decided to spend quite a bit of time and energy exploring various ways that society has been influenced by music, musicians, and musical expression. And as I began this exploration, I needed to set a couple of guidelines, a few ground rules. First, these examples should not be just about how music has developed over time. Music itself can evolve without influencing culture at large. No, these examples about music stepping into society and bringing about tangible change, that's what we're after. Second, any list that we come up with is not and cannot be exhaustive. There's no way of knowing all the ways that music has shaped what it means to be human or in a community together. This is about making a case for music's significance in history, in our history, in current culture, and in our joint hopeful future. So, has music ever changed the world? Can culture hold a people together? The story I'm going to share explores these questions. It's a very timely story for right now, especially given what's happening in Eastern Europe. The current conflict between Russia and Ukraine have brought this area of the world back into focus again and into the international spotlight. But today's story isn't really about Ukraine. It's about a small country north of Ukraine called Estonia. Now, every 5 years, the Estonian people gather on their festival grounds. It's this beautiful amphitheater with thousands of seats, expansive fields for an audience, and a large Olympic-like torch that burns on top of a tower to one side. They come from every corner of their country, young and old. They dress in traditional Estonian clothes, and they aren't there to cheer on a sporting event or a political rally. They come to sing. Close to 30,000 people participate, that's sing, in the Laulupidu, the singing festival. They come to share in the folk songs of their past and in the songs about their present and their future. The Laulupidu was established in 1869 to celebrate the important role that music plays in the life of the Estonian people. Estonia is a small country of about 1.2 million citizens. It's nestled between the Baltic Sea and Russia, as you can see here, and it's been said that the Estonian people have inhabited this land for over 5,000 years. Over the course of those millennia, they have seen many hardships, conflicts, and occupations, yet they have survived. This culture is rich in music and stories. They have one of the largest collection of folk songs in the entire world. And their fairy tales, the tales that they tell their children, aren't about impetuous knights or damsels in distress or sleeping princesses. Their folk hero is an old farmer, wise and powerful, who waits patiently and only acts when it's absolutely necessary. The 20th century nearly saw the complete eradication of the Estonian nation, people, and culture. In 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which promised non-aggression between the two powers. Days after signing, Germany invaded Poland and the events leading up to World War II began. An important part of this pact was a secret protocol that set physical boundaries dividing Europe between the Nazis and the Soviets. And according to this agreement, Stalin now had claim to all the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. It's a very important thing to pay attention to this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And within days of this signing, thousands of Soviet troops entered Estonia. In one night, over 10,000 people were arrested and shipped to Siberia. Only half of them ever returned back home. The occupation was more like a societal genocide. They targeted politicians, teachers, artists, anyone with influence to be either arrested or executed. The Gulag had a quota for the number of Estonians that were to be taken away. A third of them were children. The Estonians called 1940 the year of suffering. But this was only the beginning. In 1941, the very next year, Germany broke the pact and invaded Russia, taking over the occupation of Estonia. Those that had aided the Soviets were arrested or executed. The young men were forced to join the German army, and only 3 years later, Germany retreated, and the Soviets came back again with a vengeance. Now those who aided the Nazis were called enemies of the state. Thousands of people fled the country or died trying. In 1945, as the war was coming to an end, Stalin promised Churchill and Roosevelt that there would be free elections in Estonia. This never happened, but it did pacify the US and the UK. By the end of World War II, a quarter of the population of Estonia was gone, and the Iron Curtain fell on the people of Estonia as decades of Soviet occupation began. One of the goals of Stalin's regime was to bring uniformity across the vast territory that was now under Soviet control. Russification is a term used to describe the cultural assimilation that was taking place. Russian citizens would come by the thousands and settle in other territories in order to influence the labor force and local politics. Smaller countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia saw not just the end of their independence, but the eventual eradication of their culture, their entire way of life, their language, their flag, their songs. It was all being erased. In Estonia, though, the practice of Laulupidu, the 5-year national singing festival, could not be silenced, even by the Soviets. So in 1947, Stalin allowed the country to organize and participate in their first festival since the beginning of the Second World War. However, the Soviets were going to control every single aspect that they could. Soviet propaganda declared that the Laulupidu was a celebration of the Estonian people thanking Stalin and the entire Communist Party for their support, prosperity. You get the idea. This was the spin. The Estonians were told what songs to sing, what clothing to wear, and how to conduct their entire festival. They were forbidden to wear their traditional clothing. They were forbidden to sing particular patriotic songs. Most of what they sang that year was in Russian, like the Soviet anthem. At the very end of the Singing Festival in 1947 that the participants were allowed to share in their own traditional songs, and just a few of them. And this year, there was a brand new addition. The famed Estonian conductor-composer Gustav Ernesaks had written a new song, a new 4-part harmony piece, a setting of a national Estonian poem called Mu Isimaa on Minu Arm. My fatherland is my love. There, in the midst of Soviet occupation, under the watchful eye of Stalin's guards, thousands of Estonians broke into a song declaring their love for their sacred ancestral homeland. And I'll read you the second and third verses. Land of my fathers, land that I love, I can't abandon her. For her, 100 times I shall give my life. Envy makes strangers slander you. You are still alive in my heart, land of my fathers. Land of my fathers, land that I love, I want to have a rest. I will lie down in your lap for eternal sleep. My holy Estonia, your birds are singing me to sleep. Flowers are blooming from me, land of my fathers. Such gorgeous words. I love the image of flowers blooming from me, giving my life for the land, and my body becomes part of the land. Somehow, this piece escaped the Soviet censors. It's set in the Estonian language. It isn't very long, but immediately, this song became the unofficial national anthem for a country and a people desperate to hold on to their history and their identity. And of course, it was subsequently banned, forbidden to be performed again at another singing festival. And the next 2 decades were full of Soviet control and KGB surveillance. The people of Estonia were surrounded by fear on all sides. In 1969, Estonia was set to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Laulupidu. Again, the Soviets allowed this gathering, but only under strict controls. Again, no traditional garb, no performances of Muisima on Minuar, my fatherland is my love. And sure enough, the festival proceeded as planned. All the songs were sung and everything was over. However, the choirs and the audience refused to leave. They refused to go home. And all on their own, they started singing their unofficial national anthem, Muisima on Minnu Arm. No conductor, no orchestra, just thousands of voices desperate to sing this message at this moment. Now, the Soviets reacted by having a brass band begin to play to try to drown out the chorus of voices. But they failed as the Estonians took up the call and sang that song over and over and over again. As one participant in the festival shared, if 20,000 people start to sing one song, you cannot shut them up. It's impossible. And the Soviets were forced to call composer Gustav Ernst, 20 years after he had first premiered the work, back to the stage to lead the people in a final performance of this song, this declaration that the Estonian people, this rich culture, was not dead, not by a long shot. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was suffering from economic stagnation. Productivity was low, morale was down, and this global superpower was in danger of losing its status on the world stage. The leadership of the USSR was changing as Mikhail Gorbachev became the general secretary of the Soviet Party. In order to inject new life and vigor into the Soviet Union, Gorbachev instituted 2 major ideas of reform: perestroika and glasnost. These reforms, seemingly borrowed from capitalism, basically meant that there was opportunity for economic choice and a free exchange of ideas. And to put it very simply, this was a step towards a free market and freedom of speech. In the next couple of years, some of the member states of the Soviet Union put these ideas to the test. In February of 1987, the USSR announced a new mining project to take place in Estonia, basically strip mining the mountains for phosphorite. Phosphorite mines had been polluting the air and the water of Estonia for many decades, and this mine that was being proposed was the straw that broke the camel's back. Protesters stood up and talked back to the Soviets, even to Gorbachev's own face when he came to visit. There were demonstrations, slogans, and yes, there were even phosphorite songs. By September, the plans for this new mine were scrapped, and the Estonian people started to realize their own voice, their own power. So using glasnost, this free dissemination of information as their motivation, the people of Estonia began to speak publicly again, only this time not about an environmental issue like strip mining a mountain, but about politics and about their history. They began to stand up in public squares, and the bold would question the legality of the German-Russian Pact of 1939, which was the basis for all Soviet occupation. All the while they were talking, standing in these public squares, the KGB was listening, watching, and waiting for any sign of violence. Just one sign of violence and the KGB could act. Words were fine, but just one sign of violence. And it didn't come. So the Estonians gathered in larger numbers and continued to speak the truth of their past, of their heritage, and the oppression they were experiencing. They spoke and they sang. In June of 1988, around 100,000 Estonians gathered for 5 nights of nonviolent protests and singing. The songs were political and patriotic anthems with titles like "The Balkans Are Waking Up" and "I Am Estonian, and Estonian I Will Remain." One night, during these 5 nights of protests, during these gatherings, an individual drove by on a motorbike, and you can just imagine this. It's nighttime, they've been singing all day, and you hear the sound of this motorbike going by, and on the back of it was an Estonian flag. It was the first time in 50 years that the Estonian flag had been displayed freely and openly in public. The very next night, dozens of flags were on display, waving back and forth to the beat of the music. And this marked the beginning of the so-called singing revolution. It was a revolution not of bloodshed or conflict, not a revolution of killing or destruction, but as one journalist said, it was of singing and a smile. With this unified purpose, the Estonian people began to push for independence. In September of 1988, they organized a demonstration at their singing festival grounds. And this was a public forum for political discourse and song. Around 300,000 were in attendance. 300,000. And this was a third of the Estonian population at the time. An entire third of the country showed up for this one event. There were no weapons. There was only speaking and singing, and this was their power. Through their raised voices, they demanded a return to Estonian nationalism, to political freedom, to restoration of the Estonian language and of their flag. August 23rd, 1989, almost 2 million people joined hands in a human chain that stretched 675 kilometers, connecting the capitals of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And they did this on the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which the Soviet Union was still using 50 years later as justification to occupy these countries. This event, this human chain between 3 capitals of these Baltic states, was called the Baltic Way. And it was a peaceful protest against what these citizens called an illegal occupation. After the resounding success, that successful protest of the Baltic Way, Estonia was emboldened to take even more risky steps towards independence, even while they were under the watchful eye of the Kremlin. They began registering adult citizens under the authority of Estonia, not the USSR. They came up with their own passports. Almost 860,000 individuals declared they were Estonian, not Soviet. In 1990, these Estonian citizens voted for their own independent Congress in direct opposition to Moscow. Now, of course, this angered the Soviets, especially those that lived and worked in Estonia. 40% of the country's population was made up of Russian Soviet citizens that had made Estonia their home as part of Stalin's Russification movement in the past few decades. These Russians living in Estonia began to organize their own anti-independence movements, and they had their own demonstrations. One particular one brought them to the Estonian Capitol building. And this demonstration took a frightening turn as the Soviets broke down the gates and occupied the Capitol courtyard and grounds by force. Does that sound familiar? The Estonians responded. They came to the Capitol building and surrounded the entire building, all of the grounds, with larger numbers than the Soviets inside. It was a very tense moment. Everyone was wondering if this was going to become violent. But instead of a fight, the Estonians provided a way for their opponents to leave peacefully. They parted the sea, if you will. They created a path out. And the Estonians joined hands and they started to sing together their songs of independence. The Soviets, in face of all of this, had no choice but to walk peacefully and quietly through this sea of voices, and no blood was spilt. Now, this, unfortunately, was not the case in other Baltic states. Lithuania and Latvia both saw their protests become quite violent. And the blame for this violence and all this unrest fell on Mikhail Gorbachev. And in 1991, his supposed failure led to a coup in Moscow. Gorbachev was arrested and the military took over and tanks began to roll across the Soviet Union. Estonia declared its independence immediately, hoping to avoid armed conflict. But the Soviet forces came anyway, their tanks moving through the country and exerting their control. So the Estonians rushed to protect the next important thing they could think of, and it was their television and radio tower. It was their main source of information at the time. It's how they got their news. It's how they stayed connected with one another. And they guarded it with their bodies. They stood in the path of Soviet troops and Soviet tanks with no guns, no weapons, just their presence hand in hand, blocking the way. There were two gentlemen that were charged to be guards in the tower, and they told themselves that they are probably going to die in this moment, as the Soviets are just waiting for the chance to come through and to take over the information channels in the country of Estonia. And when all hope seemed lost, when it all seemed to be over, when it all seemed lost, it suddenly was over. Boris Yeltsin, the Russian president at the time, announced that Russia, the largest and most important member of the Soviet Union, was seceding from the Soviet Union. Suddenly, there was no Soviet army. Those tanks belonged to Russia, and Yeltsin was calling them home. The Soviet Union dissolved in just days, and Estonia was now an independent nation. So, today, the Laulupidu, the singing festival, it continues every 5 years, and the last observance was just before the pandemic in 2019. And it saw 1,020 choirs and over 32,000 participants. On the singing festival grounds there in Tallinn, there is a statue of the composer, conductor Gustav Ernst, who wrote that unofficial national anthem I shared with you earlier, Mu isima on minu arm. And when you think about a statue of a great composer, like a Beethoven or a Mozart, you see them standing tall, maybe up on top of a pedestal. But let me show you the picture of this statue of Gustav Ernst. He's sitting with his chin on his hand, and he's watching. He's watching the proceedings. He's listening. He's listening to the people, listening to them as they sing. I think it's a perfect symbol of the Estonian people. The Estonians get to gather. They get to sing what they want, wear what they want. And they won their freedom through peaceful protest and through singing. They saved their folk songs. They saved their traditions, their language, and their culture using nothing but the power of music. And that's it. Thank you for listening to that story.
Thank you, James. That was riveting and sobering to see the parallels. We have a question for you here. In view of its long efforts to maintain a distinctive cultural and linguistic heritage, how does Estonia handle refugees from conflict zones such as Syria, Afghanistan, and perhaps now Ukraine? Do new Estonians join choirs and participate in the Festival of Song?
That is a great question. I know that Estonia is open to its neighbors and has been taking in refugees. But I also know that these different choirs come from all these different sections of the country. And you'll see these representations of all these different tribes of people wearing their traditional garbs. And I know that they have other choirs from other countries that come to participate. So other states of the Baltic states are invited as well to come to the singing festival and to participate together. But I do think that they hold very tightly to their own culture in such a way. But I feel like the message of the Laulupidu, the message of having that many amount of people coming together to sing, can't help but be a bit more open. Do you know what I mean? Like it can't help but be more inclusive and allowing more voices to come in.
Okay. So that, I'm not sure you can answer this question, but I'll throw it out there just for people to think about. Do you think it would still work for this concept of the human chain and the power of music to help Ukraine retain and assert its independence? Is this transferable to them, or was this sort of unique in this time period in Estonia?
If you had said in 1970 that there was going to be a human chain of nonviolent protests connecting the Baltic states together, if you had said that there would be such a possibility as a singing revolution of a nonviolent protest that's based around culture and a revitalization and a resurrection of a culture after 50 years of oppression, I think they would have told you it was impossible then. Mm-hmm. We don't know what's possible, and we don't know what's impossible until we try. I think what's so great about the Estonian singing revolution is that it shows us a different way. Do you know what I mean? It's not just, it's not about aggression, and it's not even about passivity. It's about standing in the way and saying, I'm a human being just like you. And you're going to notice that I'm here. You're going to hear my voice. You're going to hear my song. And I'm going to declare this, that I am here. I am Estonian, and Estonian I will remain. That's what their songs were really about. And there's such power in that. And man, I would really like to see us try that in our hope, in our wishes for cultural change.
Well, that determination sounds so similar to the Ukrainians' determination. Do you think the Ukraine, is this widely known with the Ukrainians, would many of the population in Ukraine likely have known about this history of the Estonian singing revolution? Would they know that they might possibly imitate it or adapt it?
That is a question I don't have an answer to. I know the history of the Estonian singing revolution, and I'm certain that it's something that has been shared, a story that has been shared, especially across Eastern Europe. But how it would manifest in a different culture like Ukraine, I don't know. I don't know, but
No.
I would certainly think it's worth a try.
Yes, yes, this point, yes. Okay, so a few more questions. I understand that the Laulupidu festival was originally for male choirs only. Was it controversial when the issue of women participating in the festival first came up? Is there still some opposition from male traditionalists?
I think that there was opposition when they first opened up to allowing women to be a part of the Laulupidu. But to be honest, in the 2019 Laulupidu, if you take a look, there are all kinds of different choirs that are involved, some all women, some all men. I think that there's a lot less of that today than there was in the past.
Okay. Do you think that this festival will be able to take place this year again?
Well, if it took place in 2019, the next time it comes around is 2020.
5 years. Yeah.
So that'll be the next time that it comes around. And here's hoping that by 2024, they'd be able to meet together and sing.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually we hear the downsides of nationalism and cultural identity. How is this positive maintained here, and why doesn't it devolve into supremacy?
I think I think that we give the idea of nationalism a bad rap in some regards, because we equate the idea, and this is my personal opinion, so take this with a grain of salt, but we equate the idea with nationalism as saying like white nationalism, which white isn't a nation. White isn't really its own thing, right? Throughout history, there's been these movements of nationalism, especially in music, of trying to find a cultural expression for yourself and for your culture, where you come from, who you are, a connection to your history, to your past, to your ancestors, and especially to the land. And that's what I really think the Estonians were getting into here. And you can see it in the lyrics of their song, My Fatherland is My Love. You see this final verse of saying, I'm being sung to sleep by my own land, and someday the flowers will bloom from me. Someday my body will be a part of this land, and it will come out of me. That kind of nationalism is not selfish. That kind of nationalism is selfless. It is a giving of self to something bigger than yourself. And I find that to be a very positive idea. So it's not about wrapping yourself around an idea or it's wrapping yourself around a cultural touchstone. It's wrapping yourself around the land and the home of your fathers, that or your ancestors. And yes, you could take that to a negative way, but I think what the Estonian singing revolution really does for us is shows us a positive way that this can be expressed, a non-violent, life-affirming way of expressing nationalism to the point that it brings about revolutionary change.
Okay. And I'm wondering if this might be any possible link to the previous question about, is there a chance that such a similar or comparable revolution might occur through singing and human chains in Ukraine? This question says, do the people living in the Baltic states want to go to Ukraine to help fight, seeing that they all went through similar horrible times at the hand of Russia? So in other words, might the Estonians go into Ukraine and perhaps make them aware of these other means of revolting?
Well, I would hope, I mean, like, that would be fantastic. But I do know that what they're seeing is, I do know that where Estonia and the Baltic states are right now is they're seeing a repeat of history, that they're seeing what they've been what they fought for so long, what the singing revolution stood for, and what they were able to gain through this peaceful protest and through this standing up for their culture. They're seeing it at jeopardy, that at any moment this could be taken from them, that the tanks and the planes of Russia could continue to sweep and try to pull back together the Soviet Union once more. And I really feel like that's the pressure that we're feeling in a very historical way, is this desire to see the Soviet Union come back to its former power and to take over the amount of land that it had before. So I know that that is something that is a fear for the Baltic states and Estonia specifically, and they've said as much on the international stage.
Right.
I don't know what's happening diplomatically behind the scenes. I don't know what Estonia is saying to Ukraine, but I do know that there's power in us sharing this story, that there's power in us saying, look what happens if 20,000 people sing the same song. Nobody can shut them up. So let's start singing the same song.
There must be some historian somewhere that has suggested this to some of the powers that be in Ukraine. We would hope. Okay, new question. Where in the US are we most likely to find choirs and other musical groups that continue to do traditional Estonian singing and instrumental music?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. I do not have the answer to that. I know that there's a small Estonian population here in Vermont. And I've been able to actually—
Is it in one area or is it?
Just like small groups of families.
Okay.
But and I've been able to talk with them about this story, and actually they were able to point me in the direction of some songs that are useful. So if you listen to the timeline episodes that cover this, you'll hear even more Estonian folk music that goes with it. But if you're curious, there is a couple of documentaries that are just called The Estonian Singing Revolution. And you can take a look at those documentaries to find out more, to get more behind the, well, not behind the scenes, but more from the actual voices of the people that were there. And it was done just a few years ago. So they have people that have been involved in the Laulupidu since before the Soviet Union and then after. So you can follow this progression within that documentary. I would highly recommend it.
Okay. Could you speak a bit about this person is asking that, or mentioning that rock and roll played quite a part in the USSR and when the wall came down. Could you speak to the role of rock and roll?
Well, there's quite a bit of rock and roll that was involved in the singing revolution. That was the style of music of the 80s at the time. If you listen to their to the Baltic Way songs that they used, that there was rock and roll. In fact, what I played for you was a kind of orchestral version of what's a more rock and roll song that was being used at the time. It's the it was that power of rebellion within rock and roll, I think, that really captured the imagination, and the almost like a punk rock sensibility of that I'm going to say something. I have a guitar, 3 chords, and a message. And there's power to that, right? There's power to the idea of being loud, but being loud with a purpose. And I think that's really what these activists and these musicians were latching onto. The ability to make a lot of noise so that somebody's listening and then have something to say. You know, I highly respect that. To play a loud song that says, "Hey, I'm Estonian and you can't move me."
Yeah. Well, that ties nicely, I think, into this next question. In your view, which other countries' folk music traditions, if any, most closely resemble those of Estonia?
Well, see, that's hard because there's quite a few. I'm thinking of Western cultures, European cultures. There's been such a kind of like melting pot that happened in the in the Renaissance and after, that kind of mixed a lot of those different things together. So if you really want to dive into other cultures that have similar kind of folk stories, you're going to need to go to South America. You're going to need to go to the Far East. I'm reminded of Colombia, of the songs of Argentina. I'm reminded of the rich folk tunes that you can experience, especially in the Canton region of China. That there is places in the planet that have yet to be homogenized. I would reach out to them quite a bit for something that feels similar to the folk history and the expression of the Estonian people. What I love about the Estonian musical expression throughout the years is that it has evolved as the music around them has evolved, but yet has remained itself, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
So we have these folk tunes and these from Estonia that are, we have no idea how old they are, centuries old. And we have these rock songs that they wrote in the 1980s. There's something that ties them together that you can kind of hear and feel, but yet they've taken on the different tones and genres of each time period that they're a part of. I find that to be quite unique and beautiful.
Well, and this ties into the next question, and maybe you can just continue or elaborate a bit on what you were saying. Is there anything unique in the Estonian qualities or characteristics of their music? Anything you particularly associate with Estonian music, other than the political power?
Well, to be honest, it would take a lot more of a musicological journey for me to be able to dive in and to try to find those ineffable qualities that make Estonian songs. However, what I can say is that what I see in Estonian culture is a strong connection to their land and to their past and their history and their ancestors that I think is lacking in in other cultures and in other countries. They are strongly connected to their land and their history. They are strongly connected to this place. And that, I think, is what really brings the uniqueness of not just their music, but their art, their dress, everything that makes their culture their culture. I think
it's their identity, really. The essence of their identity. Yeah.
It's the essence of their identity, is that their connection to their land and their history. And that's the reason why we have so much of their folk tunes and so much of their stories have been preserved, because somebody preserved them. And I know that that's like a duh moment, like it's an obvious observation. However, it means that they have meant enough through the centuries and through the generations that they've been shared, handed down one generation after another. Grandmother teaches granddaughter and grandfather teaches grandson, and on down it goes. These songs, these stories, who they are gets passed down. And man, I feel like we miss that quite a bit especially in our modern day. I think we miss the opportunity to sit multi-generational and to pass down knowledge, history, culture, stories, and songs.
Has music played a part in Ukrainian history and culture? Maybe in a different way, but is there something you would identify with Ukrainian music that ties into their history and culture?
Well, the Ukrainian musical history is tied quite a bit to Russian musical history. In fact, many of the composers that we call Russian composers are Ukrainian. So that's difficult. And it's difficult to separate the two, especially since the time of Mikhail Glinka, since the time of Russian nationalism in the mid to late 1800s, in the 19th century. it's difficult to extract the two. I'd have to do a bit longer dive. I have to say, I don't know enough about Ukrainian folk history. I need to learn more, because like I said, there are many composers who I would say are Russian composers. However, if you look, they're Ukrainian. They come from Kyiv, you know, like, and you start to realize, oh my goodness, I'm doing the same thing. I am lumping these different cultures together through my ignorance.
Well, and it's also interwoven in terms of what time you ask about and what location. There's so many complicating factors. Okay, well, do you think the average Russian knows about the singing revolution in Estonia?
Oh, I hope so, but I don't know. I don't know what they know. Again, the power of stories is in our ability to tell them. And I think the point of the story is to continue to tell it, to continue to tell that this is possible, that there is another way, that there is a way that doesn't lead to violence. Do the Russians know? I mean, I can bet you that Putin knows.
Yeah. It's hard to believe it's in their school curriculum though, isn't it?
I would doubt that they're talking about it right now. But again, I don't know. The point of the story, again, is to tell it. That's the point. The point is to tell it.
Okay. Question about the documentary you mentioned. What is the name or names of the Estonian Singing Revolution documentary, and where can we view it?
Let me look that up for you since we have a moment right here.
All right.
So there's a 2006 film called The Singing Revolution, and you can find out quite a bit about the history of it and get links to find out more about it from singingrevolution.com. Singingrevolution.com is a great way of looking into it. The particular documentary that I was talking about is called The Singing Revolution. It was released in 2007 from Estonia itself. And it's a great documentary. I would highly recommend it.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we've come to the end of the questions that I have. If anyone has a quick one they'd like to enter into the Q&A or the chat, please feel free. Otherwise, oh, we might have one more. It popped up here. Let me see. How will you, quote, tell your story, end quote, in the future?
How will I tell my story?
Well, maybe it's this story. It says, how will you tell your story? But it may mean this story. I'm not sure.
Well, we're telling it right now. And
it's evolving as we speak, right?
Exactly. And the story is evolving as we speak. And so let's continue telling it. You tell the story to somebody else and they'll tell it to somebody else. You know, it's that viral way of bringing this history to the forefront. I think that's the answer. Keep telling it. And
we'll keep our ears open to see if any Ukrainian music or movements pop up. Oh, I think we have another question. Oh, it's just mentioning that where someone saw the documentary, but in the past. Okay. Oh, maybe. One more. No, not there. I think that's it, James. This has just been tremendous. And as I said at the beginning, sadly, we didn't know how many overtones it would have for today, but that makes it all richer and more meaningful. And we can only say more hopeful, we hope. Thank you, James.
James, thank you so much. If you all would like to see this lecture again, look at the email that Glenn sent out to you this morning with the link, and there's full instructions of how to watch it starting next Thursday on CCTV. In fact, you can look at any lectures. that we've shown recently, but a lot of them are archived. So just a quick tip. In the meantime, have a wonderful week. James, thanks so much again. And we'll see you all again next week, our last lecture.
Can I just mention really quickly that they can also, within a week, CCTV will have posted this recording on their website too, which is also an email that Glenn sends. So you could either watch it on CCTV next Thursday at 2 o'clock. There'll be a rerun of what you just saw and heard, or for posterity, and probably in about a week or so, CCTV will have the link to this lecture on their website at the link that is in the email that Glenn sends each week. So you can rewatch it yourself, share it with your friends and family, whatever. So yeah, so yes, one last lecture next week.
Right, I know. Well, have fun in this coming week, everyone, and we'll see you next Friday. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
James. Bye.
Bye-bye.